Alrighty, that took a little longer than I wanted to. Welcome back to another thrilling episode of Free Read Fridays. I'm your intrepid narrator, Fraggeth, and today we're going to read more of The Jesus Incident by Frank Herbert and Bill Ransom. We are approaching the halfway point. In fact, I think we will hit the halfway point after this week, which is nice. Yeah. So, previously on, and I don't think we have to worry about the screen room this week. Let me double check. No, we have more hints at the screen room, though. So, what happened last time? Let's see, the big one is that, Kerro Panille and Raja Thomas / Flattery are now groundside on Pandora. We don't really know what Kerro's been up to, but we know that our boy Raja is getting right to work on trying to find some way of communicating with the Lectro-Kelp, which means he's interfacing with Wela Taulini. What else has happened? Hali Ekel, in a bid to understand Kerro Panille a bit better, has tried interacting with Ship, and Ship has responded and said, "Hey, I'm going to show you something. Do you trust me?" And she's like, "Well, yes. You're Ship. You give everything that I breathe and eat and drink. I trust you." And he's like, "Okay. So I'm about to show you some things. They're going to be kind of unpleasant, but it's important, I promise." And he's sent her somewhere through space and time to witness some dude, some beat up dude named Yeshua, carrying a T-shaped object, wooden object, a cross, if you will, up a hill. One wonders what's going on there. And she's had her mind placed into an old lady in this place and time. The last thing that we got left with right before we broke off last week, was that Jesus Lewis has shown up Shipside. And to confer with Morgan Oakes, the CP in charge, chaplain psychiatrist in charge, and tell him what's been going on and why he's been incommunicado for, we don't actually know exactly how long, I don't think. We might be told. I want to say it's like a week or something. Anyway, that, I believe, is where we're going to pick up. Oh no, that's not where we broke last week, but it's still, that's where we'll pick up anyway. Something I had not realized was coming up was I am not going to be around this coming Monday, regrettably. I didn't know what was going on, but I won't be around this Monday, but Wednesday and Friday should still be a lock. I may try to keep. I may do Monday's stream Tuesday if I can set the time aside. We'll see. I will not promise it, but I will try to do that. I will not know until the time basically is already hit, regrettably. So while I'd love to promise it in very definite terms, I cannot. But yeah, so that's where we're at. Let's get cracking, I guess. Oh yeah, this weekend I will get the playlists updated, so we don't have to worry about now that Frankenstein is over. Everything will be running on a, I won't say even keel, but it'll be on a keel of some kind. Alrighty, without further ado, let's get a rocking and a rolling with more of the Jesus Incident by Bill Ransom and Frank Herbert.
You call Avata Firefly in the night of the sea. Avata has doubts about such words because Avata sees the landscape of your mind. Avata moves through your landscape with difficulty. It shifts and twists and changes as Avata goes through. But Avata has made such journeys before. Avata is an explorer of such landscapes. Your phantoms are Avata's guides. We are linked in motion. What is this thing you call the natural universe? Is that something taken from your God? Ah, you have separated your parts to create the unique. You do not need this separation for your creations. This fluid evasiveness of your landscape is your strength. The patterns, the patterns. From yourself comes the forces which shape the course of each thought. Why do you confine your thought in a tiny, fixed landscape? You find a distinction between measurement and preparation of your landscape. You continually prepare, saying, I am going to say something aloud. But that limits what you say, and it tells your listener to accept your limits. All such measurement and limiting date back to a common system in a simple, linear landscape. Look about you, human. Where do your senses find such simplicity? Does a second look at the landscape yield the same view as the first look? Why is your will so inflexible? A magical affinity between object and likeness, between being and symbol, underlies all symbol systems. It is the assumed foundation of language. The word for thing or object in most languages is related to the word for say or speak, and these, in turn, have their roots in magic. Kerro Panille. I sing to the Avata. Oakes stood in stunned silence, staring at Jesus Lewis standing just inside the CP's cubby hatch. Somewhere there was a background buzz. Oakes realized he had left the holofocus projecting Agrarium D9. Yes, it was full dayside out there. He slapped the cutoff. Lewis moved another step into the cubby. He was breathing heavily. His thin, straw-colored hair was disarrayed. His dark eyes moved left, right, probing the room. It was an eye movement which Oakes identified as characteristic of groundsiders. There was a patch of pseudo-flesh over an injury on Lewis's narrow, cleft chin, another over the bridge of his sharp nose. His thin mouth was twisted into a wry smile.
What happened to you?
Clones. Deep breath. Revolt.
The redoubt?
A sharp twinge of fear shot through Oakes. It's all right. Limping, Lewis crossed the room, sank into a divan. Is there any of your special joy juice around? Every last drop was lost at the redoubt. Oakes hurried to a concealed locker, removed a bottle of raw Pandoran wine, opened it, and handed the whole bottle to Lewis. Lewis upended the wine and took 4 long swallows without a breath while he stared around the bottle at Oakes. The poor old CP looked to be in bad shape. There were dark circles under his eyes. Tough. For Oakes, the moment was welcome as a time to recover his wits. He did not mind serving Lewis, and the sense of personal concern this conveyed would have a desired effect. Obviously, something very bad happened at the redoubt. Oakes waited until Lewis put down the bottle, then,
They revolted?
The discards from the scream room, the injured and the others we just can't support. Food's getting very short. I put all of them outside.
Oakes nodded. Clones thrown out of the redoubt were, of course, condemned to death. Quick and efficient disposal by Pandora's demons, unless they had the misfortune to encounter nerve runners or a spinneret. Messy business. Lewis took another deep swallow of the wine. Then,
We didn't realize that the area had become infested with nerve runners.
Oakes shuddered. To him, nerve runners were the ultimate Pandoran horror. He could imagine the darting, thread-like creatures clinging to his flesh, savaging his nerves, invading his eyes, worming their ravenous way through to his brain. The long agony of such an attack was well known groundside, and the stories had made the rounds shipside. Everything Pandorans feared. Oh, sorry. Everything Pandoran feared the runners, except, perhaps, the kelp. They seemed immune. When he could control his voice, Oakes asked,
What happened?
The clones raised the usual fuss when we put them outside. They know what it's like out there, of course. I suppose we didn't pay as close attention as we should. Suddenly they were screaming, "Nerve runners!"
Your people buttoned down, of course.
Everything shut up tight while we tried to spot the boil.
So?
Lewis stared at the bottle in his hands, took a deep breath. Oakes waited. Nerve runners were horrible, yes. It took 3 or 4 minutes for them to do what other demons did in a few eye blinks. Same result, though. Lewis sighed, took another swallow of the wine. He appeared calmer, as though Oakes's presence told him that he really was safe at last.
They attacked the redoubt,
Lewis said.
Nerve runners?
the clones.
Attacked? But what weapons?
Stones, their own bodies. Some of them smashed the sewage baffle before we could stop them. 2 clones got inside that way. They were infected by then.
Nerve runners? In the redoubt?
Oakes stared at Lewis in horror.
What did you do?
There was a wild scramble. Our mop-up crew, mostly E-clones, locked themselves in the aquaculture lab, but runners were in the water lines by then. The lab's a shambles. No survivors there. I sealed myself in a command room with 15 aides. We were clean.
How many did we lose?
Most of our effectives.
Clones?
Almost all gone.
Oakes grimaced.
Why didn't you report? Ask for help?
He tapped the pellet at his neck. Lewis shook his head.
I tried. I got static or silence, then someone else trying to talk to me, trying to put pictures in my head.
Pictures in his head.
That was a good description of what Oakes had experienced. Their safe little secret communications channel had been penetrated. Who? He voiced the question. Lewis shrugged.
I'm still trying to find out.
Oakes put a hand over his own mouth.
The ship? Yes, the damned ship was interfering.
He did not dare speak openly of that suspicion. The ship had eyes and ears everywhere. There were other fears, too. A nerve runner boil had to be met by fire. He envisioned the redoubt a mass of cinders inside.
You say the redoubt's all right?
Clean, sterilized, and we have a bonus.
Lewis took another long swallow of wine and grinned at Oakes, savoring the suspense he read in the CP's face. The CP was so easy to read.
How?
Oakes did not try to hide his impatience.
Chlorine and heavily chlorinated water.
Chlorine? You mean that kills nerve runners?
I saw it with my own eyes.
That's simple. It's that simple?
Oakes thought of all the years they had lived in terror of these tiniest demons.
Chlorinated water?
Heavily chlorinated, undrinkable, but it dissolves the runners. As a liquid or a gas, it penetrates all the fine places to get every one. The redoubt stinks, but it's clean.
You're sure?
I'm here.
Lewis tapped his chest, took another swallow of wine. Oakes was reacting strangely. It was unsettling. Lewis put down the bottle of wine and thought about the report he had read on the shuttle coming shipside. Legata to the screen room. Were there no limits to what the old bastard might do? Lewis hoped not. That was how to control Oakes, through his excesses.
You are indeed here, Oakes agreed. How did you how did you discover?
Those of us in the facilities room had all of the controls in front of us. We started dumping whatever we could find to.
But chlorine. How did you get chlorine?
We were trying salt brine. There was an electrical short, a wide-scale electrolytic reaction in the brine, and we had chlorine. I was on the sensors at the time and saw the chlorine kill some runners.
You're sure?
I saw it with my own eyes. They just shriveled up and died.
Oakes began to see the picture. Colony had never put chlorine and nerve runners together. Most shipside caustics had little effect groundside anyway. Potable water was produced with filters and flash heat from laser ovens. That was the cheapest way. Fire worked on nerve runners. Colony had always used fire. Another thought occurred to him.
The survivors. How?
Only those locked into a sealed area before the infection spread were saved. We flushed everything else with chlorine gas and heavily chlorinated water.
Oakes imagined gas killing people and runners, the caustic water burning flesh. He shook his head to drive out such thoughts.
You're absolutely sure the redoubt is safe?
Lewis stared up at him.
The precious redoubt.
Nothing was more important.
I'm going back dayside.
Belatedly, Oakes realized he should show more human concern.
But, my dear fellow, you're wounded.
Nothing serious, but one of us will have to be at the redoubt all of the time from now on.
Why?
The cleanup was pretty bloody, and that's causing trouble.
What kind of trouble?
The surviving clones, even some of our people, well, you can imagine how I had to clean up the place. They were necessary losses. Some of the surviving clones and a few of the more irrational among our people have... He shrugged.
Have what? Explain yourself.
We've had to handle several petitions from clones, and there were even a few of our people who sympathized. I have Murdoch down there standing in for me while I came up to report.
Clones? Petitions? How are you handling them?
The same way I handled the food problem.
Oakes scowled.
And the sympathizers?
Again, Lewis shrugged.
When we sterilized the area around the redoubt, the other demons returned. They're a fast and efficient way to solve our problem.
Oakes touched the scar of the pellet at his neck.
But that is, why didn't you send someone up to...
We stayed until we were sure we were clean.
Yes, of course. I see. Brave fellows.
And can you imagine what would happen if word of this leaks out?
You're quite right.
Oakes thought about what Lewis had said. As usual, Lewis made the right decisions. Astringent, but efficient.
Now, what's this I hear about Legata?
Lewis asked. Oakes was outraged.
You have no right to question my...
Oh, simmer down. You're going to send her to the scream room. I just want to know if we prepare to replace her.
Replace Legata? I think not.
Let me know in plenty of time if you need a replacement.
Oakes was still angry.
It strikes me, Lewis, that you've been very wasteful of lives.
You know some other way I could have handled this?
Oakes shook his head.
I meant no offense.
I know, but this is why I don't report such things unless you ask or unless I have no choice.
Oakes did not like the tone Lewis took there, but another thought struck him.
One of us has to stay at the redoubt all the time. What about, Colony?
You're going to have to wind things up here and come groundside to manage Colony. It's our only answer. You can use Legata for shipside liaison, provided she's still useful after the scream room.
Oakes thought about this. Go groundside among all of those vicious demons? The periodic demonstration of power trips were bad enough, but live there full time?
That's why I asked about Legata, Lewis said. Mollified, Oakes ventured a more important question.
How are conditions at Colony?
Safe enough as long as you stay inside or travel only in a servo or shuttle.
Oakes closed his eyes for a long blink, opened them. Once more, Lewis demonstrated impeccable reasoning. Who else could they trust as they trusted each other?
Yes, I understand.
Oakes glanced around his cubby. No visible sensors, but this had never reassured him. The damned ship always knew what was happening shipside.
I will have to go groundside.
The reasons were compelling. Lewis would take Lab 1 to the redoubt, of course, but there were too many other delicate matters in balance at Colony.
Groundside.
He had always known he would have to quit the ship one day. It did not help that circumstances had made the decision for him. The move was being forced, and he felt vulnerable. This incident with the nerve runners did nothing to reassure him.
What a dilemma!
As he gathered more power and exercised it, Shipside became increasingly untrustworthy. But Pandora remained equally dangerous and unknown. It occurred to Oakes then that he had been hoping for a tranquilized and sterilized planet, a place made ready for him by Lewis, before going groundside.
Sterile. Yes.
Oakes stared at Lewis. Why did the man appear so smug? It was more than survival against the odds. Lewis was holding something back.
What else do you have to report?
The new E-clones. They were in an isolated chamber and all survived. They're clean, completely unprogrammed, and beautiful. Just beautiful.
Oakes was distrustful. The statistical incidence of deviation among clones was a known factor. The body, after all, was transparent to cosmic bombardments which altered the genetic messages in human cells. Rebuilding the DNA structure was Lewis's specialty, yes, but still.
No kinks?
I used electrokelp cells and went back to recombinant DNA as a foundation for the changes. He rubbed the side of his nose with a forefinger. We've succeeded.
You said that last time.
It worked last time, too. We simply couldn't keep up with the food supply necessary to.
No freaks?
A clean job. All we get is accelerated growth to maturity. And that kelp isn't easy to work with. Lab people hallucinating all over the damn place and aging faster than.
Are you still able to waste lab technicians on this?
They're not wasted.
Lewis was angry, exactly the reaction Oakes had sought. Oakes smiled reassuringly.
I just want to know that it's working, Jesus, that's all.
It's working.
Good. I believe you're the only person who could make it work, but I am the only person who can give you the freedom in which to do this. What is the time frame?
Lewis blinked at the sudden shift of the question. Cagey old bastard always kept you off balance. He took a deep breath, feeling the wine, the remembered sense of protective enclosure which the ship, always gave him.
How long?
Oakes insisted.
We can continue in E-clone's growth, the aging, actually, and arrive at any age you want, from conception to age 50 in 50 divans. Divans. Divons. It's time. Some time measurement.
And since. Anyway.
In good condition?
Top condition and completely receptive to our programming. They're muling infants until they become our, servants.
Then we can restore the redoubt's working force rather rapidly.
Yes, but that's the problem. Most of our people know this, and they, saw what I did with the clones and the sympathizers. They're beginning to see that they can be replaced.
I understand.
Oakes nodded.
That's why you have to stay at the redoubt.
He studied Lewis. The man was still worried, still holding something back.
What else?
What else, Jesus?
Lewis spoke too quickly. The answer had been right there in front of his awareness, awaiting the question.
An energy problem. We can work it out.
You can work it out.
Lewis lowered his gaze. It was the answer he expected. Correct answer, of course, but they had to produce more burst, their own elixir.
I will give you one suggestion, Oakes said. Plenty of hard work precludes time for plotting and worry. Now that you've solved the clone problem, put your people to work eliminating the kelp. I want a neat, simple solution. Enzymes, virus, whatever. Tell them to wipe out the kelp.
An infinite universe presents infinite examples of unreasoned acts, often capricious and threatening, godlike in their mystery. Without god powers, conscious reasoning cannot explore and make this universe absolutely known. There must remain mysteries beyond what is explained. The only reason in this universe is that which you, in your ungodlike hubris, project onto the universe. In this you retain kinship with your most primitive ancestors. Roger Thomas, Ship Records. As she stood frozen in terror of the foul-breathed stranger, Hali tried to think of a safe response. The terrible differences of this place where Ship had projected her compounded her sense of helplessness. The dust of the throng which followed the beaten man, the malignant odors, the passions in the voices, the milling movements against a single sun.
Do you know him?
The man was insistent. Hali wanted to say she had never before seen the injured man, but something told her this could not be true. There had been something disquietingly familiar about that man. Why did he speak to me of God and knowing? Could that have been another shipman projected here? Why had the wounded man seemed so familiar? And why had he addressed her directly?
You can tell me.
Foul Breath was slyly persistent.
I came a long way to see him.
The old voice which Ship had provided her sounded groveling, but the words were true. She felt it in these old bones she had borrowed. Ship would not lie to her, and Ship had said this: "A very great distance." Whatever this event signified, Ship had brought her expressly to see it.
I don't place your accent, Foul Breath said. Are you from Sidon?
She moved after the crowd and spoke distractedly to the Inquisitor who kept pace with her. "I come from Ship." What were those people doing with the wounded man?
Ship? I've never heard of that place. Is it part of the Roman March? Ship is far away, far away.
What were they doing up on that hill? Some of the soldiers had taken the piece of tree and stretched it on the ground. She glimpsed the activity through the crowd.
Then how can Yeshua say that you know God's will?
Foul Breath demanded. This caught her attention. Yeshua? Ship had said that name. Oh, sorry, I misspelled it in my stream description. My bad. It was the name Ship had become. It was the name Ship said had become Jesus, and then Jesus. Jesus. She hesitated, stared at her inquisitor.
You call that one Yeshua? She asked. You know him by some other name?
He gripped her arm hard. There was no mistaking the avaricious cunning in his voice and manner. Ship intruded on her then. This one is a Roman spy, an informer who works for those who torture Yeshua.
Do you know him? Foul Breath demanded. He gave her arm a painful shake. I think this Yeshua is related to Ship, she said. Related to? How can someone be related to a place? Isn't he related to you, Ship? She spoke the question aloud without thinking.
Yes.
Ship says that's true, she said. Foul Breath dropped her arm and stepped back 2 paces. An angry scowl twisted his mouth. Crazy! You're nothing but a crazy old woman! You're just as crazy as that one! He gestured up the hill where the armored men had taken Yeshua. See what happens to crazies!
She looked where he had pointed. The 2 men already hanging there were roped to the crosspieces, and she realized they were being left to die. That was going to happen to Yeshua. As the full realization hit her, Hali began to weep. Ship spoke within her mind. Tears do little to improve acuity. You must observe. She wiped her eyes on a corner of her robe, observing that Foul Breath had moved up into the crowd. She forced herself to climb up with him, pressing in among the people. I must observe. The armored ones were stripping the robe from Yeshua. This exposed his wounds, cuts and bruises all over his body. He stood with a stolid watchfulness through all this, not even responding to the gasp which went up when the mob saw his wounds. There was an unguarded vulnerability to this moment, as though everyone here was participating in his own personal death. Someone off to the left shouted, He's a carpenter! Don't tie him on! Several large, crudely wrought nails were pressed up through that part of the crowd and thrust into the hands of an armored young man. Others took up the cry, Nail him on! Nail him on! 2 of the armored men supported Yeshua on either side now. His head swayed slightly from side to side, then bowed. Things were being thrown at him from the far side of the crowd, but he made no attempt to dodge. Hali saw stones strike him, an occasional glob of spittle. It was all so bizarre, played in an orange glow of mute sunlight coming through a high layer of thin clouds. Hali blinked the tears from her eyes. Ship said she had to observe this. Very well. She estimated that she stood no more than 6 meters from Yeshua's left shoulder. He appeared to be a wiry man, probably active through most of his adult life, but now he was near the point of exhaustion. Her medtech training told her that Yeshua could survive this, given proper care, but she had the impression that he did not want such care, that none of this surprised him. If anything, he seemed anxious to get on with it. Perhaps that was the reaction of a tortured animal, cornered and beyond all will to fight or flee. As she watched, he lifted his head slowly and turned to face her. She saw then the slight glow about him, an aura such as she had seen around her own body when Ship had projected her away from. Is he also a projection of Ship? She saw that there was a debate going on among the armored men. The nails were being waved in front of one of them by the one who had taken them from the crowd at the far side. Yeshua was looking at her, compelling her attention. She saw recognition in his eyes, the lift of eyebrows, a suggestion of surprise. Ship intruded. Yeshua knows where you are from. Are you projecting him? That flesh lives here as flesh, Ship said, but there is something more. Something more? That's why you have brought me here. What is it, Ekel? What is it? There was no mistaking the eagerness in Ship. He has another body somewhere? No, Ekel, no. She cringed before Ship's disappointment, forcing herself to a peak of alertness which her fears demanded. Something more, something more. She saw something then, a significance of the aura. Time does not confine him. That is very close, Ekel. Ship was pleased, and this reassured her, but it did not remove the pressure from the moment. There is something of him which time cannot hold, she thought. Death will not release him. You please me, Ekel. Joy washed through her, to be cut off abruptly by Ship's demanding intrusion. Now, watch this. The armored men had settled their argument. Two of them threw Yeshua to the ground, stretching his arms along the timber. Another took the nails and, using a rock for a hammer, began nailing Yeshua's wrists to the wood. Someone shouted from the crowd, "If you're the Son of God, let's see you get out of this! Let's see you get yourself out of this!" Hali heard jeering laughter all around her. She had to clasp her hands across her breast, forcing herself not to rush forward. This was barbarous. She trembled with frustration. "We are all children of Ship." She wanted to shout this to these fools. It was a lesson of her earliest warship classes, the admonition of the chaplain. Two soldiers lifted the length of wood, hoisting the man who was nailed to it by his wrists. He gasped as they moved him. 4 soldiers, 2 on each side of him, lifted the timber on their spear points into a notch on a tall post which stood upright between the other 2 victims. Another soldier scrambled up a crude ladder behind the post and lashed the crosspiece into the notch. 2 more soldiers moved up to Yeshua's dangling feet. While one soldier crossed the ankles, the other nailed the feet to the upright. Blood ran down the wood from the wound. She had to open her mouth wide and breathe in gulping gasps to keep from fainting. She saw the brown eyes flash with sudden agony as a soldier shook the upright to test its firmness. Yeshua slumped forward, unconscious. "Why are they causing him such pain? What do they want him to do?" Hali pressed forward in the suddenly silent throng, elbowing her way through with a strength which she found surprising in this old body. She had to see it close. She had to see. Ship had commanded her to observe. It was difficult moving in the press of people, even with the strength of her inner drive, and she suddenly became aware of the breath-held silence in the throng. Why were they so silent? It was as though the answer had been flashed on her eyes. Oh, that shouldn't be italicized. It was as though the answer had been flashed on her eyes. They want Yeshua to stop this by some secret power in him. They want a miracle. They still want a miracle from him. They want Ship, God, to reach out of the sky and stop this brutal travesty. They do this thing and they want a God to stop it. She pressed herself past 2 more people and found that she had achieved the inner ring of the crowd. There were only the 3 timber constructions now, the 3 bodies. I could still save him, she thought.
I play the song to which you must dance. To you is left the freedom of improvisation. This improvisation is what you call free will.
The Oak's Covenant.
The meeting will please come to order.
Oakes used his wand amplifier to dominate the shuffling and buzzing in the colony's central meeting hall. It was a domed and circular room, truncated by a narrow platform against the south wall where he stood. When not being used for meetings, the room was taken over by manufacture of food production equipment and the sub-assembly operations for the buoyant bags of the LTAs. Because of this, all meetings had to be called at least 10 hours in advance to give workers time to clear away machines and fabrics. He still felt beset by the tensions of moving from shipside to groundside. His time sense was upset by the diurnal shift, and this meeting had been rushed. It was almost the hour of mid-meal here. There would be psychological pressures from the audience because of that. This was the wrong hour for a meeting, and there had been some muttering about interference with important work, but Murdoch had silenced that by leaking the announcement that Oakes had come groundside to stay. The implications were obvious. A major push was impending to make Colony secure. Oakes would command that push. On the platform with Oakes stood Murdoch and Rachel Demarest. Murdoch's position as director of Lab 1 was well known, and the mystery surrounding that lab's purposes made his presence here a matter of intense curiosity. Rachel Demarest was another matter. Oakes scowled when he thought about her. She had learned things while acting as a messenger between ferry and groundside. Sounds in the room were beginning to subside as the stragglers made their way in and took seats. Portable chairs had been provided, many constructed from the twisted Pandoran plant material. The unique appearance of each chair offended Oakes. Something would have to be done to standardize appearances here. He scanned the room, noting that Raja Thomas was present in a seat down front. The woman beside Thomas fitted with the description. The woman beside Thomas fitted the description Murdoch had provided of one Willa Taulini, a survivor of the original kelp research projects. Her knowledge might be dangerous. Well, she and the poet would share Thomas's fate. End of that problem. Excuse me, shifting my headset cable around there. Oakes had been groundside for almost 2 diurns now, and much of that time had been taken up in preparation for this meeting. There had been many eyes-only reports from Lewis and his minions. Murdoch had been quite useful in this. He would bear watching. Legata had provided some of the data, and, even now, was back shipside gathering more. This meeting represented a serious challenge to his powers, Oakes knew, and he intended to meet it head on. Lewis had estimated that about 1,000 people were here. The larger part of colony personnel could never be spared from guard and maintenance and building and rebuilding. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That was Pandora's way. Oakes was aware, though, that most of those facing him down on that floor carried the proxy votes of associates. There had been an unofficial election, and this would be a real attempt at democracy. He recognized the dangers. Democracy had never been the shipside way, and it could not be allowed groundside. It was a sobering thought, and he felt adrenaline overcoming an earlier indulgence in wine. The people were taking a devilish long time to get settled, moving about, forming groups. Oakes waited with what show of patience he could muster. There was a dank metallic smell in the room which he did not like, and the lights had been tuned too far into the green. He glanced back at the Demarest woman. She was a slight figure with unremarkable features and dull brown hair. She was notable only for her intensely nervous mannerisms. Demarest had been the instigator of the election, a petition bearer. Oakes managed a smile when he looked at her. Lewis had said he knew how to defuse her. Knowing Lewis, Oakes did not probe for details. Presently, Rachel Demarest came forward on the platform. Leaving her wand amplifier on its clip at her wrist, she raised both arms, twisting her palms rapidly. It was interesting that the room fell silent immediately. Why didn't she use her amplifier? Oakes wondered. Was she an anti-tech?
Thank you all for coming, she said.
Her voice was high and squeaky, with a whine at the edge.
We won't take much of your time. Our CP has a copy of your petition and has agreed to answer it point by point.
Your petition, Oakes thought. Not my petition. Oh, no.
But evidence from Lewis and Murdoch was clear. This woman wanted a share in colony power. And she had managed most cleverly to say CP with an emphasis that made the title appear foolish. Battle, therefore, was joined. As Demarest stepped back, glancing at him, Oakes produced the petition from an inner pocket of his white singlesuit. Making it appear accidental, he dropped the petition. Several pages fluttered off the platform.
No matter.
He waved back people in the front row as they moved to recover the pages.
I remember everything in it.
A glance at Murdoch brought him a reassuring nod. Murdoch had found chairs for himself and Demarest. They sat well back on the platform now. Oakes hunched forward toward his audience in a gesture of confidence, smiling.
Few of our people are here this morning, and you all know the very good reasons for this. Pandora is unforgiving. We all lost loved ones in the 4 failures on Black Dragon.
He gestured vaguely westward, where the rocky eminences of Black Dragon lay hidden beyond the mists of more than 1,000 kilometers of ocean. Oakes knew that none of those failures could be laid at his hatch. He had been very careful about that. And his presence permanently groundside imparted a feeling of excitement about colony prospects here on the undulating plains of the Egg. That's capital T, capital E, the Egg. That sense of impending success had contributed to the confrontation brewing in this room. Colonists were beginning to think beyond the present state of siege, rubbing their wishes together, shaping their desires for personal futures.
As most of you know,
Oakes said, lifting his amplifier to make his voice carry,
I am groundside to stay, groundside to direct the final push for victory.
There was a polite spatter of applause, much less than he had expected. It was high time he came groundside. He had loyalties to weld, organization to improve.
The Demarest petition, then, he said. Point 1, elimination of one-man patrols.
He shook his head.
I wish it could be done. Perhaps you don't understand the reason for them. I'll put it plainly. We are conditioning the animals of Pandora to run like hell when they see a human.
That brought a rewarding burst of applause. I just said that. Oakes waited for it to subside. Then,
your children will have a safer world because of your bravery. Yes, I said your children. It is my intent to bring the Natali groundside.
Shocked murmurs greeted this announcement.
This will not happen immediately, Oakes said, but it will happen. Now, point 2 of the Demarest petition.
He pursed his lips in recollection.
No major decision about colony risks or expansion shall be made without approval by a clear majority of colonists voting in council. Do I have that right, Rachel?
He glanced back at her, but did not wait for her to respond. Glancing once more at the scattered papers of the petition on the floor below him, he looked hard at the first row and swept his gaze across the audience.
Putting aside for the moment the vagueness in that word clear and this unexplained concept of council, let me point out one thing we all know. It took 10 hours to clear this room for a meeting. We have a choice. We keep this hall clear and ready at all times, thereby putting a dangerous strain on every major decision.
Oh, whoops, skipped a line.
Thereby putting a dangerous strain on production facilities, or we accept a 10-hour delay for every major decision. I prefer to call those survival decisions, by the way.
He made a show of looking back at the large wall chrono, then returned his attention to the audience.
We've already been here more than 15 minutes, and obviously we will use more time on this.
Oakes cleared his throat, giving them a moment in which to absorb what he had said. He noted a few squirmers in the audience sending signals that they would like to comment on this argument, and he had not missed the fact that Murdoch had taken Rachel Demarest's arm, whispering in her ear, and, incidentally, keeping her from interrupting.
Point 3, Oakes said. More rest and recuperation back on the ship. If we... Ship!
Someone in the middle rows shouted. Oakes identified the speaker, a guard on the hangar perimeter squad, one of Demarest's supporters.
Not the ship, but ship!
The man, half out of his seat, was pulled back by a companion.
Let's face that, then. Oakes said. I presume that a chaplain psychiatrist has a modicum of expertise with which to address this question.
He glanced at Rachel Demarest, who was still being held quietly but firmly by Murdoch.
You want to use titles? Very well, let us put this title into its proper perspective. Not CP, but chaplain psychiatrist. All the traditions of the ship stand behind me. I will spell it out for you,
Oakes said, turning once more to the audience.
We are a mixed bag of people. Most of us appear to have come from Earth, where I was born. We were removed by the ship. Ship saved you!
That damned guard would not stay silent.
Ship saved you! Our sun was going nova! So the ship says.
Oakes gave it a bit more volume by a touch of his wand's controls.
The facts are open to another. The facts are open to other interpretation. The facts? What have we experienced?
Oakes drowned him out and then reduced the volume.
What have we experienced?
Lower volume still.
We found ourselves on the ship with other people whose origins are not clear at all. Some clones, some naturals. The ship taught us its language and controlled our history lessons. We learn what the ship wants us to learn. And what are the ship's motives? Blasphemy!
Oakes waited for the stir of this outcry to subside. Then,
the ship also trained me as a doctor and a scientist. I depend on facts I can test for myself. What do I know about shipmen? We can interbreed. In fact, this whole thing could be a genetic...
I know my origins, and so does everyone else.
It was Rachel Demarest breaking away from Murdoch and leaping to her feet. She still was not using her wand, but she fumbled with it as she moved toward Oakes.
I'm a clone, but I'm from...
So the ship says.
Again, Oakes hurled that challenge at them. Now, if Lewis and Murdoch had read the colonists correctly, suspicions had been placed like barbs, where they could do the most good when the vote was called.
So the ship says, Oakes repeated. I do not doubt your sincerity. I am merely aghast at your credulity.
She was angered by this, and, still fumbling with her wand, failed to give herself enough amplification when she said,
That's just your interpretation.
Her voice was lost on all but the first rows. Oakes addressed the audience in his most reasonable manner.
She thinks that's just my interpretation. But I would be failing you as your chaplain psychiatrist if I did not warn you that it is an interpretation you must consider. What do we know? Are we merely some cosmic experiment in genetics? We know only that the ship,
he gestured upward with his left thumb,
brought us here and will not leave. We are told we must colonize this planet which the ship calls Pandora. You know the legend of Pandora because it's in the ship's educational records. But what do you know about this planet? You can at least suspect that the name is very appropriate.
He let them absorb this for several blinks, knowing that many among them shared his suspicions.
4 times we failed to plant a colony over on Black Dragon, he shouted. 4 times! Let them think about their lost loved ones.
He glanced at Rachel Demarest, who stood 3 paces to his left, staring at him aghast.
Why this planet and not a better one? Oakes demanded. Look at Pandora. Only 2 land masses. This dirt under us, which the ship calls the Egg, and that other one over there, which killed our loved ones, Black Dragon. And what else has the ship given us? The rest of Pandora? What's that? A few islands too small and too dangerous for the risking. And an ocean which harbors the most dangerous life form on the planet. Should we give thanks for this? Should we...
You promised to take up the entire petition.
It was Rachel Demarest again, and this time with her amplifier turned up too far. The intrusion shocked the audience, and there were clear signs that many found the shock offensive.
I will take it up, Rachel.
Very soft and reasonable.
Your petition was a needed and useful instrument. I agree that we should have better procedures for work assignments. Calling this deficiency to my attention strengthens us. Anything which strengthens us meets my immediate approval. I thank you for it.
She got her wand under control.
You imply that the electrokelp is the most dangerous.
Rachel, I already have started a project which will try to determine if there is something useful to us about the kelp. The director of that project and one of his assistants are sitting right down there.
Oakes pointed down at Thomas and Wheeler, saw heads turned, people craning to see.
Despite the dangers, he said, very potent and obvious dangers, as anyone will agree who has studied the data from these oceans, I have started this project. Your petition comes after the fact.
Then why couldn't we have learned this when...
You want more open communication from those of us making the decisions?
We want to know whether we're succeeding or failing.
Again she had her amplifier turned too high.
Reasonable, Oakes said. That is one of the reasons I have moved myself and my staff permanently groundside. In my head, he tapped his skull, is the complete plan to make Pandora into a garden planet for...
We should have council members on...
Rachel, you propose having your people at key positions? Why, your people? What record of success do they have?
They've survived down here.
Oakes fought to conceal anger. That had been a low blow. She implied that he had remained safely ensconced shipside while she and her friends risked Pandora's perils. A reasonable tone was the only way to meet that challenge.
I'm down here now, he said. I intend to stay. I will submit to your questions at any mutually acceptable time, despite the fact which we all know time taken to debate our problems could be used to better advantage for colony as a whole.
Will you answer our questions today?
That's why I called this meeting.
Then what's your objection to having an elected council which...
Debating time, just that. We don't have the time for such a luxury. I agreed with those who objected that this meeting took us away from more important work, from food. But you insisted, Rachel.
What are you doing over on Black Dragon? That was the objectionable perimeter guard down in the audience, taking a new tack now.
We are attempting to build another foothold for colony over on Dragon. Reasonable, reasonable, he reminded himself. Keep your voice reasonable.
Dividing your energies?
Rachel Demarest demanded.
We are using new clones provided by the ship's facilities, he said. Jesus Lewis is out there now directing the effort. I assure you that we are risking only new clones who fully understand the nature of their involvement.
Oakes smiled at Rachel Demarest, recalling Murdoch's jocular admonition. A few lies don't hurt when you've given them some truth to admire. Turning back to face the audience, Oakes said,
But this diverts us from the orderly resolution of our meeting. Rather than waste our time this way, we should take the issues one at a time.
His announcement about the attempt at Dragon had served its purpose, though. His listeners, even Rachel Demarest, were absorbing the implications with varying degrees of shock. Someone in the right rear quadrant of the room shouted,
What do you mean, new clones?
Silence followed his demand, a waiting silence which said it spoke a question in the minds of most.
I'll let Jesus Lewis speak to that at another meeting. It's a technical question about matters which have been under his direct supervision. For now, I can say that the new clones are being bred and conditioned to defeat the perils we all know exist out on Dragon.
There, Lewis was prepared with subtle lies and half-truths. The injection of rumors and key elements of their prepared story into Colony's grapevine would tie this issue down. Most people would accept the prepared story. It was always better to know that someone else was going into danger, sparing you that necessity.
You didn't answer our question about rest and recuperation,
Rachel Demarest accused.
You may not realize it, Rachel, but the schedule of Shipside R&R is the most important issue before us today.
You're not going to buy us off with Shipside time,
she said. She was clenching her wand with both hands, pointing it at him like a weapon.
Again, I am aghast at your limited perception, Oakes said. You really are not fit to be making the decisions which you ask the power to make.
At this direct attack, she backed 2 steps away from him, glared into his eyes. Oakes shook his head sadly.
You have a problem down there, brave enough to state the essential problem.
Oh, sorry, you have
a friend down there, brave enough to state the essential problem.
Oakes pointed down at the perimeter guard who sat in red-faced anger.
Have to watch that one. A fanatic for sure. But not brave enough nor perceptive enough to see the full implications of his emotional outburst.
That did it. The man was on his feet and shaking a fist at Oakes. "You're a false chaplain! If we follow you, Ship will destroy us!"
Oh, sit down!
Oakes used almost the full amplification to drown out the man's voice. The sound shock provided the man's companions with the interval to pull him back into his seat. Turning down the amplifier, Oakes said,
Who among you asks what I ask? An obvious question. Where did warship originate? With the ship. That ship.
He thrust a pointing finger ceilingward.
You all know this, but you don't question it. As a scientist, I must ask the hard physical questions. Some among you argue that the ship has been motivated by the wish to save us, a beneficent savior. Some of you say warship was a natural response to our savior. Natural response? But what if we are guinea pigs?
What are your origins, Oakes?
That was Rachel Demarest again. Beautiful. She could not have performed better for him had she been programmed. Didn't she know that by the best guess the naturals outnumbered the clones almost 4-1? Perhaps even more. And she already had admitted to being a clone.
I was a child of Earth,
Oakes said, and once more his voice was in its most
I was a child of Earth,
Oakes said, and once more his voice was its most reasonable. He looked directly at her, then back at the audience. A little barbering of the truth was called for now. No need to bring up the fact that old Edmund Kingston had chosen him as successor.
Most of you know my history. I was taken by the ship and trained as chaplain psychiatrist. Don't you understand what that means? The ship directed my training to lead warship. Don't any of you find something strange in this?
Right on cue, Rachel intruded.
That seems the most natural.
Natural?
Oakes allowed free rein to his rage.
A mirror and recorder would have done just as good a job as... A mirror and recorder would have done just as good a job as such a chaplain. If we have no free will, our warship is a sham. How can the ship expect to condition me for such a task? No, I question what that ship tells us. I don't even doubt. I question, and I don't like some of the answers.
This was public blasphemy on a scale few of them had ever imagined. Coming from the chaplain psychiatrist, it amounted to an open revolt. Oakes allowed the shock to become well seated in them before hammering it home. He raised his face to the domed ceiling and shouted,
Why don't you strike me dead, ship?
The hall became one long-held breath, while Oakes turned and smiled at Murdoch, then turned the smile on his audience. He reduced the amplifier volume to the minimum required for reaching the hall's extremities.
I obey the ship because the ship is powerful. We are told to colonize this planet? Very well. That is what we are doing, and we are going to succeed. But who can doubt that the ship is dangerous to us? Have you had enough food lately? Why is the ship reducing our food supplies? I am not doing this. Send a deputation shipside if you wish to verify this.
He shook his head from side to side.
No, our survival requires that we depend as little as possible upon the ship, and, eventually, no dependence upon the ship at all. Buy you with shipside time, Rachel? Hell no! I intend to save you by freeing you from the ship!
It was a simple matter to read the majority reaction to this challenge. He might appear to be a fat little man, but he was braver than any of them, dared more than the bravest among them, and he was risking new clones, whatever they might be. He was also going to feed them. When it came time for the question,
Put me out of office or continue me, but no more of this democracy and council crap.
When it came time for that, it was clear they would support him by acclamation. He was their brave leader, even against Ship, and few could doubt it now. Both Lewis and Murdoch argued for a bit more insurance, though, and Oakes knew it would do no harm to follow their script.
It has been suggested that we introduce complicated and time-consuming forms into our survival efforts,
Oakes said, his voice tired.
The ones who propose this may be sincere, but they are dangerous. Slow reactions will kill us all. We are required to act more swiftly than the deadly creatures around us. We cannot wait for debate and group decisions.
As both Lewis and Murdoch had insisted she would do when faced with defeat, Rachel Demarest tried the personal attack.
What makes you think your decisions will save us?
We are alive and colony prospers, Oakes said. My first effort here, my primary reason for being here, is to direct a crash program to increase food production.
No one else could do what...
But I will.
He allowed just a touch of mild reproof into his tone. Anyone who could defy Ship could certainly solve the food problem.
We all know that I did not make those decisions which killed our loved ones on Dragon. If I had been making those decisions, we might still be alive and growing out there.
What decisions? You talk about...
I would not have wasted our energy trying to understand life forms which were killing us. Simple sterilization of the area was indicated, and Edmund Kingston could not bring himself to order it. He paid for that failure with his life, but so did many innocents.
She still wanted her reasonable confrontation.
How can you fight what you don't understand?
You kill it,
Oakes said, facing her and lowering the amplification.
It's that simple. You kill it.
There is fear in the infinite, in the unlimited chaos of the unstructured. But this boundless place is the never-ending resource of that which you call talent, that ability which peels away the fear, exposing its structure and form, creating beauty. And this is why the talented people among you are feared. And it is wise to fear the unknown, but only until you see the new-found fearlessness which identity beautifies. Kerro Panille, translations from the Avata. For a concentrated surge of time, Hali Ekel stood at the inner ring of the throng and stared up at the three men so cruelly suspended. It was a nightmare scene, the blood, the dust, the orange light which threw grotesque shadows on the doomed men, the sense of latent violence in every movement around her.
I'm an observer, observer, observer.
Her chest hurt when she breathed, and she could smell the blood dripping from Yeshua's nailed feet.
I could save him.
She took one shuffling half step forward. Don't interfere. Ship's command stopped her. It was not in her to disobey that command. The conditioning of warship was too strong.
But he'll die there, and he's just like me.
He is not just like you.
But he's...
No, Ekel. When the time comes, he will remember who he is, and he will go back just as you will go back. But you two are profoundly different.
Who is he?
He is Yeshua, the man who speaks to God.
But he... why are they doing this to him? What did he do?
He reported his conversations. Now they try to move God in this way. Observe, this is not the way.
God? But God is Ship, and Ship is God.
And the infinite is infinite.
Why won't you let me save him?
You could not save him.
I could try.
You would only inflict pain on that old flesh which you have borrowed. That flesh has enough pains. Why would you want to make it suffer more? It occurred to her then that there might be another consciousness waiting somewhere to re-enter this body. Borrowed. She had not thought of it that way. The idea made her intensely aware of responsibility toward the body. She forced her attention away from the dangling figure of Yeshua, those bleeding feet and palms. The other two men began struggling against their restraints. Hali saw the cruel reason behind this torture then. In time they would smother. Their chest muscles would fail and respiration would stop. The roped men pushed their feet against the wooden uprights, trying for leverage, seeking another few blinks of life. One of the armored men saw this and laughed.
Look at the thieves squirm.
Someone in the crowd behind Hali jeered.
They're trying to steal a little more time.
One of the roped men looked down at his armored tormentor and groaned.
You'd hang your own mother.
He gasped for another breath, and Hali saw the effort of it in his chest muscles. As he exhaled, he moved his head feebly toward Yeshua.
This man here did nothing illegal.
The armored man swung his spear butt and smashed the speaker's knees. The thief sagged and writhed in a final rattling agony. As he did this, Yeshua stirred and turned toward him. Today you go home with me, Yeshua said. It was said in a low tone, but most of the crowd heard him. The words were repeated for some few on the outskirts who had missed it. The armored man laughed, said,
Bullshit.
He swung his spear butt once more and broke the other thief's knees. This man, too, collapsed in a spasm of choking gasps. Yeshua lifted his head, then called out, I'm thirsty. The spear swinger looked up at him.
Ah, the poor boy's thirsty. We should give him something nice to drink.
Hali wanted to turn away, but could not move. What had made these men into such beasts? She searched around her for something in which to give the dying man a drink. Once more Ship warned her. Let this happen, Ekel. This is a necessary lesson. These people must learn how to live. Some of the crowd began to leave. The show was over. Hali found herself alone on one side of the dying man, only a few women across from her, and the armored guardians of this torment. A young boy came running up with a jug which he handed to the armored man who had smashed the knees of the thieves. Hali saw a coin passed to the boy. He bit it and turned away, not even looking at the condemned men. The armored man fastened a rag to the end of his spear, poured some of the jug's contents on it, and pushed the rag up to the dying man's mouth. Hali detected the odor of acetic acid. Vinegar! But Yeshua sucked at the rag hungrily. The moisture spread across his cracked and bloody mouth. As the rag was pulled away, he slumped forward, once more unconscious. An older man across from Hali called out,
He better job before sundown. We can't leave him up there for the Sabbath.
Easily done. The armored man had taken the rag from his spear. He turned, ready to swing it against Yeshua's knees. In that instant, the light faded. Darkness spread over the landscape. A moan spread through the crowd. Hali glanced up, saw a partial eclipse behind the clouds. A young woman broke from the crowd opposite Hali and grabbed the soldier's spear. "Don't!" she cried. "Let him be! He's nearly gone."
What's it worth to you?
The young woman looked up at Yeshua, who took this moment to twist in delirium. She looked back at the spearman. Her back was to her companions, and she faced only Hali as she lifted the spearman's hand and placed it on her breast inside her robe. At that instant, Yeshua arched his back against the wooden upright and called out, "Father! Father! Why have you forsaken me?" A great breath shuddered through him. His eyes opened, his gaze directly on Hali. "It is finished," he said. He fell forward, eyes still open, and did not take another breath. The abrupt hush was shattered by the wailing of a woman in the group across from Hali. Others joined in, tearing at their garments. The armored man took his hand away from the young woman's breast. Hali stood fixed in place, staring up at the dead man. As she looked, the sunlight returned. A wind picked up the hem of her robe. It chilled her. She could see the armored men moving off, one of them with an arm around the shoulder of the young woman who had stopped the spear blow. Hali turned away and headed down the hill, unable to watch more. She spoke to Ship as she moved. "Ship?" "Yes, Ekel." "Is there a history of this event in the Shipside records?" "It is there for the asking. You who were raised shipside have not had much reason to ask, especially those of you whose ancestors came from places where this was not common knowledge." "Is this real, him dying there just now?" "As real as your flesh waiting shipside." She felt the tug of that remembered flesh then. This tired old body was such a poor vehicle by comparison. She felt joints aching as she stumbled down the hillside. "I want to go back, Ship." "Not yet." "If Yeshua was a projection, why didn't his body disintegrate when he died?" "Active imagination supports him. It is essential to such phenomena. If I were to forget about the you who is if I were to forget about the you that is shipside, or the you that is here, the forgotten flesh would disappear." "But he's dead. What good is it to keep his flesh intact?" "The survivors require something to bury. They will return to his tomb one day and find it empty. It will be a marvel. They will say he returned to life and walked from his tomb." "Will he do that?" "That is not part of your lesson, Echo." "If this is a lesson, I want to know what happens to him." "Ah, Echo, you want so much." "Won't you tell me?" "I will tell you this. Those who remember him travel this world over, teaching peace and love. For this they suffer murder and torture, and they incite great wars in his name, many bloody events, even worse than what you have just seen." She stopped. There were rude buildings just ahead, and she felt that she would be more protected in among them. They were more like corridors, like ships' own passages. But she was filled with outrage. "What kind of a lesson is this? What good is it?" Ekel, your kind cannot learn peace until you are drenched in violence. You have to disgust yourselves beyond all anger and fear until you learn that neither extortion nor exhortation moves a god. Then you need something to which you can cling. All this takes a long time. It is a difficult lesson.
Why?
Partly because of your doubts.
Is that why you brought me here? To settle my doubts?
There was no response, and she felt suddenly bereft, as though Ship had abandoned her. Would Ship do that?
Ship?
What do you hear, Ekel?
She bent her head, listening. Hurried footsteps. She turned. A group of people rushed past her down the hillside. A young man hurried behind this group. He stopped beside Hali. You stayed the whole time and did not curse him. Did you love him too? Did you love him too? She nodded. The young man's voice was rich and compelling. He took her hand.
I am called John. Will you pray with me in this hour of our sadness?
She nodded and touched her lips, pretending she could not speak.
Ah, dear woman, if he had but said the word, your affliction would have passed from you. He was a great man. They mocked him as the Son of God, but all he claimed was a kinship to man. The Son of Man, he said. That is the difference between gods and men. Gods do not murder their children. They do not exterminate themselves.
She sensed then in this young man's manner and his voice the power of that event on the hillside. It frightened her, but she realized that this encounter was an important part of what Ship wanted her to experience. Some things break free of time, she thought.
You can come back to your own flesh now, Echo,
Ship said. Wait! John was praying, his eyes closed, his grip firm on her hand. She felt it was vital to hear his words.
Lord, he said, we are gathered here in your name, one in the foolishness of youth and the other infirm with age. We ask that you remember us as we remember you. As long as there are eyes to read and ears to hear, you will not be forgotten.
She listened to the earnestness of the prayer as it unravelled from his mind. The firm touch of his hand pleased her. There were faint veins on his eyelids which trembled as he spoke. She did not even mind the universal stink which came from him as it came from all of those she had encountered here. He was dark, like Kerro, but he had wild, wiry hair that framed his smooth face and accented his intensity. I could love this man.
Careful, Echo.
Ship's warning amused her as much as her own thought had surprised her, but one look at the old liver-spotted hand that John held reminded her she walked in another time. This was an old woman's body which enclosed her awareness.
We ask this in Yeshua's name,
John concluded. He released her hand, patted her shoulder.
It would not be good for you to be seen with us.
She nodded.
Soon we will meet again, he said, at this house or that, and we will talk more of the Master and the home to which he has returned.
She thanked him with her eyes and watched him until he turned a corner and was gone among the houses below her. I want to go home, Ship. There came a moment of blankness, and, once more, the tunnel passage, then the lab's dazzling lights, pained her eyes after the earthside dusk. But those other eyes weren't the same as these eyes. She sat up, feeling the vital agility of this familiar flesh. It reassured her that Ship had kept the promise to return her to her own body. Ship,
Ask, Echo.
You said I would learn about interfering with time. Did I interfere?
I interfered, Echo. Do you understand the consequences?
She thought about John's voice in prayer, the power in him, the terrible power which Yeshua's death had released. It was unleashed power, capable of joy or agony.
The sense of that power terrified her. Ship interfered, and this power resulted. What good was such power? What is your choice, Ekel? Joy or agony? The choice is mine. What choice, Ekel? How do I choose? By choosing, by learning. I do not want that power. But now you have it. Why? Because you asked. I didn't know. That is often the case when you ask. I want joy, but I don't know how to choose. You will learn. She swung her feet off the yellow couch, crossed to the screen and keyboard where this terrifying experience had begun. Her mind felt ancient suddenly, an old mind in a young body. I did ask. I started it, back in that ancient time when all I wanted was Kerro Panille. She sat down at the keyboard and stared into the screen. Her fingers strayed over the keys. They felt familiar, yet strange. Kerro's fingers had touched these keys. She saw the instrument suddenly as a container which held raw experiences at a distance. You did not have to go in person. This machine made terrible things acceptable. She took a deep breath and punched the keys. Ancient History Records. Yeshua/Jesus. But Ship was not through intruding. If there is anything you wish to see in person, Ekel, you have but to ask. The very thought sent shudders through her body. This is my body, and I'm staying in it. That, Ekel, is a choice which you may have to share. Yo, thanks for tuning in, a cookie. No worries about being behind. That's why they're all on YouTube. Again, this weekend I will update the playlists so it'll be a bit easier to sort through and get to stuff. I try to do that early in the month as opposed to a week in, but I had Frankenstein to finish, and I figured it would be easier for me to just do it after I've bundled that all together. My imagination was too much exalted by my first success to permit me to doubt of my ability to give life to an animal as complex and wonderful as man. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Ship Records. Thanks again to whoever recommended and cajoled that I do that this October. I did not remember how well it dovetailed with this. I like to call this the flower room, Murdoch said, leading Rachel Demarest across the open area to the lock. It was bright there, and she did not like the way the younger clones pulled back from Murdoch. A clone herself, she had heard the stories about this place and wanted to hold back, to delay what was happening. Oh, geez, I really hope. Oh, no. So it is in here. We do learn about the Scream Room. Fair warning, things get really squicky in about a page. It's not going to be fun. Massive content warning. A bit of a problem. This might get me deplatformed problematic. Fortunately, it's short. It's a brief interlude, but it's really, it's pretty fucked up. I like to call this the flower room, Murdoch said, leading Rachel Demarest across the open area to the lock. It was bright there, and she did not like the way the younger clones pulled back from Murdoch. A clone herself, she had heard the stories about this place and wanted to hold back, to delay what was happening. But it was her only chance at the Oaks Lewis political circle. Murdoch kept a strong grip on her arm just above the elbow, and she knew the pain he could cause if she hesitated. Murdoch stopped at the lock and glanced at his charge. This one won't carry any more petitions, he thought. The slightly blue cast to her skin, her nervous, gangly limbs, made her appear cold.
Perhaps you and I could work something out? She said, and pressed her hip against him.
Murdoch was tempted, but that blue skin. I'm sorry, but this is standard for everyone who works here. There are things we need to know, and things that you need to know, too. He really was sorry, remembering dimly some of the things which had happened to him during his own scream room initiation. There were things which he did not remember, too, a disturbing fact in itself, but orders were orders.
Is this the place you call the scream room?
Her voice was barely a whisper as she stared at the hatch into the lock. It's the flower room, he said. All of these beautiful young clones. He waved vaguely at the room behind her. All of them come from here. She wanted to glance back. There had been some strangely shaped people hugging the rear of the throngs in the room, some with colors even stranger than her own. Something in Murdoch's manner prevented her from turning. He took her hand then and placed her palm on the sensor scribe beside the hatch. To record your entry time. She felt an odd stinging sensation as her palm touched the scribe. Murdoch smiled, but there was no mirth in it. His free hand went out to the lock cycling switch. The hatch hissed open, and he thrust her into it. In you go! She heard the hatch seal behind her, but her attention was on the inner hatch as it opened. When it had swung wide, she realized that what she had thought was a grotesque statue standing there was actually a naked living creature framed by the open end of the lock. And there were tears streaming down the creature's cheeks.
Come in, my dear.
His voice was full of hoarse gruntings. She moved toward him hesitantly, aware that Murdoch was watching through the sensors overhead. The room she entered was lighted by corner tubes which filled the entire space with a deep red illumination. The gargoyle took her arm as the hatch sealed behind her, and he swung her into the room.
His arms are too long.
I am Jessup, he said. Come to me when you are through.
Rachel looked around at a circle of grinning figures, some of them male, some female. There were among them creatures even more grotesque than Jessup. She saw that a male with short arms and bulbous head directly in front of her and had an I don't know how to read. She saw that a male with short arms and bulbous head directly in front of her had an enormous erection. He bent over to grasp it and pointed at her.
These people are real, she thought. This is not a nightmare.
The rumors she had heard did not even begin to describe this place.
Clones,
Jessup whispered beside her, as though he had been reading her mind.
All clones, and they owe their lives to Jesus Lewis.
Clones? These aren't clones, they're recombinant mutants.
But
clones are people, she whispered.
Bulbous Head lurched one step toward her, still holding that enormous erection pointed at her.
Clones are property,
Jessup said, his voice firm but still with those odd gruntings in it.
Lewis says it, and it must be true. You may develop an appreciation for certain of them.
Jessup started to move away, but she clutched his arm. How cold his flesh was!
No, wait!
Yes?
Grunting.
What happens here?
Jessup looked at the waiting circle.
They are children, just children, only weeks old.
But they're...
Lewis can grow a full clone in a matter of days.
Days? She was clutching at any delay. How? I mean, the energy.
We eat a lot of burst here. Lewis says this is the reason his people invented burst.
She nodded. The food shortage, it would be amplified enormously by the requirements of making burst. Jessup leaned close to her ear, whispered,
And Lewis learned some beautiful tricks from the kelp.
She looked at him full. She looked at him full at him. That too wide face with its toothless mouth and high cheeks, the pinpoint eyes, the receding forehead and protruding chin. Her gaze traveled down his body, enormous chest, but sunken with incurving, and narrow hips, pipe-stem legs. He was not just he, she saw, but both sexes. And now she understood the grunting. He was fucking himself. Herself. Little muscles at the crotch moved the... Rachel whirled away, her mind searching wildly for something, anything to say.
Why are you crying?
Her voice was too high.
Oh, I always cry. It doesn't mean anything.
Bulbous Head lurched another step toward her, and the circle moved with him.
Entertainment time,
Jessup said, and pushed her roughly toward Bulbous Head. She felt hands clutching her, turning her, and, presently, her memory left her. But for a long time she felt that she heard screams, and she wondered if they might be her screams. Cookie says, oh, and very off topic, a few weeks ago you read some articles on AI. Nowadays, when you call up Amazon customer service, you get connected to an AI, and it takes forever to find a real person. Ah, yes. And if you don't think that's the desired intended end result of this enshittification, then I'm sorry. It is. It is. I mean, they're not going and being like, how can we make everything actively worse? But they're not thinking, how can we make things better? So the end result winds up being the same. Kind of makes for a bit of a problem, as we've found.
Absolute dependence is the hallmark of religion. It posits the supplicant and the one who dispenses gifts. The supplicant employs ritual and prayer in the attempt to influence, control, the dispenser of gifts. The kinship between this relationship and the days of absolute monarchs cannot be overlooked. This dependence on supplication gives to the keeper of those two essentials the ritual paraphernalia and the purity of prayerful forms, that is, to the chaplain. A power akin to that of the gift dispenser.
Raja Thomas strode along a colony passage with Wela Taulini at his side. It's Wela Taulini at his side. They both wore insulated yellow single suits with collar attachments for breather helmets. It was first light of Rega outside, but in here was the soft gold of dayside illumination that any colonist could remember from Shipside. The food of this Diurn's first meal sat heavily in his stomach, and he wondered at that. They were adding some odd filler to the food. What was happening to the Shipside agraria? Could it be possible, as Oak's people hinted, that Ship was cutting down on hydroponics output? Wela was oddly silent as she matched his pace. He glanced at her and found her studying him. Their eyes flickered past a confrontation too brief to call recognition, but an orange glow suffused her neck and face. Wela stared straight ahead. They were bound for the test launch apron to inspect the new submersible gondola and its carrier. It would be tried first in the enclosed and insulated tank at the hangar before being risked in Pandora's unpredictable ocean. Why can't I just say no? She wondered. She did not have to get at the poet in the way Thomas ordered. There were other ways. It occurred to her then to ask herself about the society of Thomas's origins. What was his condition that he thinks sex is the best way to lower the psyche's guards? As happened on rare occasions when she was with others, honesty spoke within her head. Men ruled, and women were a subordinate class. She knew this had to be true. It fitted his behavior. Thomas was speaking silently to himself. I am Thomas. I am Thomas. I am Thomas. The strange thing about this inner chant, which he had adopted as his personal litany, was that it increased his sensitivity to doubts. Could it be something built into the name? Wheeler no longer trusts me, if she ever did. What is this poet, and where is he? Processing was taking an unconscionably long time with him. Will he be an arm of Ship? Why were they getting a poet on their team? It had to be a clue to Ship's plans. Obscure, perhaps. Convoluted. But a clue. This might be the element of the deadly game which he was required to discover for himself. How much time do we have? Ship did not always play the game by rules that were just and fair. You're not always fair, are you, Ship?
If you mean even-handed, yes, I am fair.
The answer surprised Thomas. He had not expected Ship to respond while he walked along this corridor. Thomas glanced at Wheeler. Silent woman. Her color had returned to its normal pale pink. Did Ship ever talk to her?
I talk to her quite often, Devil. She calls me Honesty.
Thomas missed a step in surprise. Does she know it's you?
She is not conscious of that, no.
Do you talk to others without their knowing?
To many, very many.
Thomas and Wheeler turned a corner into another portless passage, this one illuminated by the pale blue of overhead strip lighting, the color code which told them that it led outside somewhere up ahead. He glanced at Wheeler's hip, saw the ever-present lasgun in its holster there. Or lasgun. I'm not actually sure. Wheeler broke the silence. Those new clones that Oak says are being used out on the Dragon, what do you suppose they are? People with faster responses. I don't trust that Lewis. Thomas found himself in agreement. Lewis remained a mystery figure. The brutal alter ego to Oakes? There were stories about Lewis which suggested that Ship had held nothing back when lifting the lid of Pandora's box. They had come to the hatch into the hangar. Thomas hesitated before signaling the dog watch to admit them. He glanced through the transparent port, saw the sky doors of the hangar were closed. There should be little delay. What's eating you, Wheeler? She met his gaze. I've been wondering if there's anyone I can trust. Pandora's curse, he thought, and chose to direct her suspicions at Oakes. Why don't we insist on an inspection team to explore everything Oakes is doing? Do you think they'd let us? It's worth finding out. I'll suggest it to Rachel when I see her. Call her when we get inside. Can't. The roster says she's on vegetation patrol, south perimeter. I'll call her nightside. Without knowing precisely why, Thomas felt a chill at hearing this. Was that stupid Demarest woman in danger? He shook his head. They were all in danger, every moment. Again, Thomas peered through the port at activity in the hangar. There were bright lights around the sub. The LTA was lost in shadows above. Many workers moved around in the lighted area. He could see that they had opened the floor gate to expose the testing basin beneath the hangar. The lights glistened off exposed water beneath the Plaz gondola and its carrier stub. Ah, yes. They were mating the sub and the gondola. So Rachel would not be back from South Perimeter until nightside. He was caught by the curious persistences in Wheeler's ship-style language. Nightside. The irregular diurns of a planet with 2 suns caused few circadian problems for colonists. They had been shipmen, and shipmen had a ready referent at hand. Day and night were not times, but sides. Was there a clue here, something to help him in his search for a way to the heart of these people? He had thought that if he succeeded in communicating with the Lectrokelp, this would give him the desired status. Anything to help us fit into the rhythms of Pandora. If colonists learn to trust me, if they look up to me, then I can tell them what Ship really wants of them. They will believe, and they will follow. That sub in there, would it be the key? Persistent symbols. What would persist in the symbols of an intelligent vegetable? It was intelligent. He was convinced of it. So was Willa. But the symbols remained a mystery. Fireflies in the night of the sea. Did they talk to each other beneath the waves? We do. Wheela gestured at the signal switch beside the hatch. What's the delay? They're mating the new gondola and the sub. I didn't want to call anyone away from that. Oh, sorry. What's the delay? They're mating the new gondola and the sub. I didn't want to call anyone away from that. He nodded as he saw the gondola swing into place. Then he depressed the switch. Presently, a green-clad workman unsealed the inner locks and the hatch swung open. Slow procedure, but this was a dangerous area. Hatches could be locked either side, from inside when the sky doors were open. Everything groundside was designed to contain an attack. There was a musty aroma of outside within the hangar which set Thomas's nerves on edge. Wheela preceded him across the hangar floor, striding out with that watchful swing which colonists never put aside, head turning, gaze darting about. Her pale single suit fitted her body like another skin. He had insisted they go through stores for the new suits. As he had ordered, they were insulated against the sea's chill, eliminating the need for insulation on the gondola. Plaz was an excellent conductor unless doubled or tripled. This decision gave them a few extra centimeters in the gondola core. Wheela had disconcerted him when they picked up the suits. In Shipside style, there were no separate dressing rooms. She had moved right into the try-on area with him. That habit of bodily candor still bothered him. He always found it necessary to turn his back when dressing or undressing with a female companion. Wheela, on the other hand, remained frankly direct. Raj, did you know that you have a funny-looking mole on your butt? Without thinking, he had turned his head towards her just in time to see her stepping into her suit, breasts and pubis exposed. There was just the slightest hesitation in her while she continued dressing, as though she spoke only to his eyes, saying, "Of course I'm a woman. You knew that." He found himself intensely aware that she was a woman, and there was no denying the magnetic attraction she worked on him. There was also no denying that she knew this, and was amused by it in an undefinably gentle way. This knowledge in her might even have contributed to her upset when he asked her to apply sexual pressure to the new team member. She was right, too. It was cheating. But what if Ship is cheating us? Doubts. Always doubts. He found himself in silent agreement with some of the things Oakes had said. On the other hand, he could not fault Wheela's argument. We don't help ourselves by cheating each other. That open candor in her attracted him as much as the chemistry of her physical presence. But I am the goad, the devil's advocate, the challenger. I am the knight among the pawns. And he knew he did not have much time. Ship might hand him an impossible deadline at any moment, or Oakes and his crew might make good on their unspoken threat to cut this project off at the pockets as soon as they dared. There was no mistaking the latent anger in Wheela. It betrayed itself in her stride, a bit too emphatic, and in the way she studied him now as she thought he was not looking, when she thought he was not looking. But she would get to Panille and ask all of the proper questions. That was the important thing. Thomas still felt remnants of her anger as they stepped into the glaring light and bustle at the testing apron where the new sub was cradled. She was all business as she stared up at this creation which had emerged from Thomas's commands. It was a fat, metallic teardrop, slightly elongated, its LTA attachment eyelets extending along the top in a double ridge reminiscent of the backbone of an antediluvian Earthside monster. The principle was relatively simple. Most of the external sub was carrier for the plas globe of the gondola at the core. Only the drive motors and fuel storage were made strong against the sea's pressures. The carrier had one more important function now visible to her eyes. Vertical lines of plas bubble lights extended up and down the sides, each bubble 4 centimeters in diameter. The trigger system to light them in sequence passed through a computer sensor feedback program. What the sensor eyes saw in the ocean depths, these lights could play back. The kelp's patterns would be its patterns, the kelp's rhythms its rhythms. The chief of construction services, Hapat Lavu, came out to meet them at the edge of the lighted area. He was a slender, driving man, completely bald. His gray eyes missed few details of his work, and, despite a biting and accusatory tongue which delivered reprimands with thin-lipped fury, he was one of the best-liked colonists. The common assessment was, "You can depend on Hap." Dependability gained high marks groundside, and Hap Lavu was fighting for his reputation. Of all the equipment from his shops, only the subs had failed to match Pandora's demands. 16 had been lost without a trace. There had been survivors from 4, and the wreckage of 3 others had been located on the bottom. All had been crushed or otherwise disabled by giant strands of kelp. Lavu's assessment was the opinion of many.
That damn stuff can think, and it's a killer.
He had become an admirer of Thomas during their short association. Thomas had taken the accepted subcomponents and reworked them into this new design. The only parts of the plan Lavu distrusted involved communications and pickup. He spoke to that as he greeted Thomas.
You should have something better than rocket sound. They fail, you know.
Rocket sound is Rocketsonde. I'm not 100% sure what that is, but like Thomas is about to say, we'll stick with it, Thomas said. He knew what worried Lavu. The ubiquitous electrokelp not only clogged the seas, but their electrical activity jammed the communications channels, sonar to radar. Highlighter exhibited similar phenomena. Was there a relationship? There was no pattern to the jamming, it was random squirts of signal activity. Because of this, they depended on high power and line of sight relays waterside. Even then, a cloud of highlighters rising from the sea could block transmissions.
You'll have to surface before you can communicate,
Lavu said.
Now, if you let me adapt the anchor cable to...
Too many lines to the sub, Thomas said. We could tangle in them.
Then pray that you can lift above the interference for the relays to take your talk.
Thomas nodded agreement. The plan was to anchor the LTA in a lagoon, slip down the anchor cable in a vertical dive, and stay clear of the kelp barriers. We'll observe, play back their light patterns, and seek any new coherent patterns in the lights or their electrical activity, he had said. It was a workable plan. Several subs had survived exploratory dives by giving a wide berth to the kelp. It was when the subs went in to take specimens that violence occurred. Workable, but with unavoidable weaknesses. Their LTA would hang at the surface, tethered on its anchor line and awaiting the sub's return from the depths. A plan to have another LTA with a lift gondola anchored or standing by aloft had been scratched. The winds were too unpredictable, and it was argued that 2 LTAs anchored in the same lagoon would pose One sec.
Let's try that again.
A plan to have another LTA with a lift gondola anchored or standing by aloft had been scratched. The winds were too unpredictable, and it was argued that two LTAs anchored in the same lagoon would pose dangerous maneuvering problems. The necessary size of such an LTA made them difficult to handle in tight quarters. The standard procedure at the hangar was to winch them down after grappling the downhaul hawser. Instead, their LTA bag had been triple reinforced with compartmented cells. These arguments went through Thomas's mind as he studied the new submersible. Was it worth the risk? He felt that he was challenging Ship, but the stakes were the highest.
Will you let me die here, Ship?
No answer, but Ship had said that his destiny was his own now. That was a rule of this game. If the kelp is sentient and we can make contact, the rewards will be enormous. Intelligent vegetable. Did it worship? It could be the key to Ship's demands. Ship called the kelp intelligent, and that could be another twist of this game. Should he doubt? It occurred to Thomas then that if Ship were telling the truth, the kelp might be close to immortal. Except for specimens damaged by human intrusion, they had never seen dead kelp. Did it live forever?
Do you still reject a standby LTA?
Lavu said.
How long could you hold one in sight of us?
Thomas asked.
Depends on the weather, as you well know.
There was resentment in Lavu's voice. He took it personally that so many of his creations had been destroyed, all of them equipped as best as he knew for underwater survival. The answer, of course, was that Pandora's planet-wide sea contained perils beyond those they knew. Lavu felt that the entire project was now a challenge to him. A challenge to him. He did not want to quit. It was more than a concern about hardware. Lavu wanted to go out as crew.
How else can I learn what's needed if I don't go out myself?
No, Thomas said. All right, Ship. This will be the big throw of the dice.
Devil, why do you persist in such overly dramatic poses? This time he expected the response and was ready for it.
Because they won't listen to me here unless I become bigger than life to them.
Life can never be bigger than itself. Lavu patted the outer surface of the sub as Wheela moved up beside him. She had been listening to the undertones in the conversation between Thomas and Lavu. What drives Thomas? She wondered. She had only the barest details about him. Out of hive and into command of this project. Ship's doing, he said. Why?
She's heavier than any of the others,
Lavu said, thinking that the question in Wheela's mind. Oh, sorry. I'm having one of those struggles where my brain isn't on the same wavelength anymore.
She's heavier than any of the others,
Lavu said, thinking that the question in Wheela's mind.
I defy any Pandoran monster to break it.
Did you solve the problem of filling the LTA? Thomas asked.
You'll have to get your final inflation outside, Lavu said. I've laid on extra perimeter guards because the sky doors will be open longer than I like.
The sub itself? Wheela asked.
We've rigged guide cables up through the doors. That's it.
Instinctively, Thomas glanced up at the iris closure of the sky doors.
She'll be ready by 0600 at the latest.
You'll have a full night side. Oh.
You'll have a full night side of rest before going out. Who's to ride with ye?
Not you, Hap, Thomas said.
But
A new fellow named Panille is to go with us, Thomas said.
So I've heard. Untrained. A poet. Is that the truth?
An expert in communication, Thomas said.
Well then, let's run the tank test,
Lavu said. He turned and waved a hand signal at an aide.
We'll ride it with you, Thomas said. What pressure will you take it to?
500 meters.
Thomas glanced at Wheeler. She gave the barest inclination of her head to indicate agreement, then returned her attention to the sub. It curved over her, more than 3 times her height at the thickest part of the teardrop near its bow. The outer carrier concealed all but the upper bubble of the Plaz gondola within it. The induction propeller at the stern had been shielded in a complex baffle and screening system which reduced its effectiveness, but guarded it against kelp fouling. Workers ran a ladder up the side of the hull now, cushioned it with a foam blanket to keep the exterior signal lights clean, and studied it while Lavoo mounted. He spoke as he climbed.
We've installed the manual override to ensure that no random signal opens your hatch. You'll have to undog it by hand every time you open it.
No surprises there, Thomas thought. That had been Wheeler's idea. There were suspicions that the kelp could control signals in a wide scanning spectrum, and that some of the lost subs had merely been opened underwater by scanner activation of their hatch motors. Wheeler scrambled up beside Lavoo, leaving Thomas to follow. They were already inside when he reached the open hatch. He paused there to peer along this craft he would command. In a way, it was a small void ship. The stabilizer fins were like solar panels. Exterior sensors for all of the cardinal directions were like a void ship's hull eyes. And every known weak point had been multiple reinforced. Backup systems piled on backup systems. He turned, found the top rung of the access ladder with a foot, and stepped down into the gondola. It was red-lighted gloom there, with Lavoo and Wheeler already at their positions. Wheeler was bent over her console, checking her instruments, leaving the line of her left cheek visible to Thomas in the red light. How tender and beautiful that line was, he thought. Immediately he suppressed a cynical laugh. Well, my glands are still working. Cain rose up against Abel his brother, and slew him. And the Lord said unto Cain, Where is Abel thy brother? And he said, I know not, am I my brother's keeper? And he said, What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood cries unto me from the ground. Christian Book of the Dead, Ship Records. Anything goes here? Legata asked. She studied Cy Murdoch carefully as he thought about the question. He was taking too long to answer. She did not like this man, the pale eyes which defied everything around them. He kept the lab too bright, especially this late in the dayside. The young E-clones huddled against a far wall were obviously terrified of him. Well, that takes a little thought, Murdoch said. Legata pursed her lips. This was her second visit to Lab 1 in 3 diurns. She did not believe the reasons for this one. Oakes had pretended anger that she had not penetrated every element of the lab, but she had sensed the flaws in his performance. He was lying. Why had Oakes sent her back here? Lewis was no longer out of contact. What did those two know that they had not shared with her? Legata felt anger at the frustrating unknowns. Murdoch moved cautiously. Oakes had ordered Legata sent through the scream room, an exploratory, but had warned,
She is frighteningly strong.
How strong? Stronger than me? He did not see how she could be. Such a bouncy little thing. I asked you a simple question, Legata said, not bothering to conceal her anger. Interesting question, but not simple. Why do you ask it that way? Because I've seen the lab reports to Morgan. You're doing some strange things here. Well, I would say that there are few limits here, but isn't that the basis for discovery? She replied with a cold stare, and he went on. There are few limits here, so long as Dr. Oakes has a complete holo record of what we do. He has us on holo right now, she said. I know. The way he said that made Legata's skin crawl. Murdoch carried his powerful body like a dancer. He lifted his chin, and she saw a scar beneath his jaw that she had not noticed before. It mingled with creases as he lowered his chin. There was no telling his age. Given the possibility that he might be a clone, there was no telling his chronological age either. Have to look into him, she noted to herself. The things Lewis was having done here. She glanced around the room once more. Something was not right. She saw the usual holo, comm console, sensors, but the place offended her directly. She was one who appreciated beauty. Not decoration, but beauty. The two huge flowers flanking the hatchway, she'd noticed them before. They were pink as tongues, and their petals convoluted into one another like a line of mirrors. Strange, she thought. They smell like sweat. Let's get on with it, she said. First, a formality requested by Dr. Oakes. Murdoch swung a sensor scribe from a panel beside the lock. It appeared to be the standard identification reader of her Shipside experience. She placed her hand on the flat plate to allow it to read her. Stupid formality. Everyone knew who she was. A sudden tingling sensation shot up her arm from her palm, and she realized that Murdoch had said something to her. What did he say? I'm sorry. What? She felt weak and disoriented. She saw that the hatch was open, and she had no memory of him opening it. What had he done to her? Murdoch's hand was on her shoulder, propelling her into the lock. As she passed through the hatchway, she imagined that she heard a tiny voice pleading from the heart of one of the flowers. Feed me! Feed me! She heard the hatch seal behind her and realized that she was alone, and the inner door was swinging open. Slowly. Ponderous. What was all the red light? And those dim shapes moving? She walked toward the opening hatch. So strange that Murdoch had not accompanied her. She peered at the shapes awash in the red glow beyond the inner hatch. Oh, yes, the new E-clones. Some of them she recognized from the lab reports. They were designed to match the synapse-quick demons of Pandora. There was a problem with breeding for speed, something she'd intended to investigate. What was it she wanted to watch for? A voice whispered in her ear.
I am Jessup. Come to me when you are through.
How did I get inside here? Something was wrong with her time sense. She swallowed hard and felt the thickness of her dry tongue rasp against the roof of her mouth.
Good and evil hang their uniforms at the door.
Did somebody say that, or did I think it?
Oakes had said, Anything goes on Pandora. Our every fancy is possible there.
That's why I asked Murdoch. Where is Murdoch? The gargoyle clones were all around her now, and she tried to focus on them. Her eyes were not tracking. Someone grabbed her left arm. Painful. Let go of me, you! She rippled her arm and heard the grunts of surprise. Peculiar things were happening to her sense of time and the awareness of her own flesh. Blood welled up on her arms, and she had no memory of how it got there. And her body, it was naked. Her muscles corded reflexively, and she crouched in defense. What is happening to me? More hands. Rough hands. She responded in a slow motion flex of power, and she distinctly heard someone screaming. How odd that no one responded to those screams. And that is where we're going to call it for today. On that grim and squicky note, the Scream Room's pretty unpleasant. Most of the graphic depictions of what goes on in the Scream Room are largely covered. There's going to be one or two later, but pretty nasty things are happening there. We'll find out more about what that's supposed to accomplish and what it's doing later. The whole book really is a slow burn. It's actually really the entire series is kind of this interesting combination of extreme slow burn in terms of plot development and revelations, but also like things happening really quickly. It's kind of hard to explain and describe without experiencing it. Speaking of things difficult to describe or explain without experiencing it, Absolution by Jeff Vandermeer is pretty rad. I've finally gotten a fair way into it. We'll definitely be reading that at some point. It is not quite what I expected, but by no means is that a bad thing. I'm rather enjoying it so far, and that's if I can skive off from the things I need to do presently. Oh no, optical antenna. I've been super lucky so far, in that I haven't gotten it yet. People I know have, and it's not something I want to encounter, so I wish you well. Good luck getting better, and take it easy. Do what you got to do. But yeah, Absolution, we'll be getting to that eventually. Tentative plan is I'm starting a new book next Wednesday. One of the two books that I have by Chris Batchelder. I haven't decided which one I want to do. I don't know how overtly political I want to be. I guess would you rather have a satire on America's relationship with socialism, or would you rather have a satire on America's relationship with entertainment? That's the question, because at this point it's basically coin toss for me. I could go either way. Either one is good. They're both. One of them is probably slightly easier to read than the other, but uh, not so much different. Like they both play around with form, with the literary form and how you read things, how things are read, or how a read medium is a medium you're reading is different than one that you're listening to. And I'm going to try and get across what's going on. We'll see. We'll see how well it works. Um, at any rate, I'll leave that to anyone listening. If they want to throw in their vote for either a satire about America's relationship with socialism versus a satire based on America's relationship with entertainment, um, and other. They're both gross oversimplifications of what the books are. The choices are Bear v Shark and US exclamation point by Chris Batchelder. So whichever one of those people would rather hear, I will check comments afterwards before next Wednesday. Again, this Monday I will not be around. I had totally forgotten that I have other obligations, so that I just didn't even occur to me. But we'll be doing. I will not be here next Monday. I will try to make up for that stream on Tuesday, but I cannot promise it because I've got a bunch of stuff going on. So at this point, assume I won't. Even though I hate to be put a week behind, but that keeps happening. Mondays wind up being tricky for me, regrettably, from time to time. So I don't wind up having complete parity between Mondays and Fridays. Wednesdays being what they are, I put a date next to the numerical qualifier, so that's the only numerical qualifier there beyond what installment of a book I'm reading. Whereas long-term listeners know that I like to have a numerical designator, mostly for my own archival purposes, of my various Monday and Friday streams. Right now, I'm going with a methodology where I'm divvying it up into years being seasons, even though for the first 5 years of me doing this, I didn't do that, which I'm regretting now, but whatever. Better late than never. That will probably be the organizational schema going forward, because that means I can separate it out more easily and know, oh yes, episode whatever number episode that is within X year. It'll be a bit easier to narrow it down when the time comes for me to start sharing these things out, which will probably come at some point. Anyway, with all that said, as usual, stay safe, stay sane, be decent to each other. I know recent events are not necessarily what some of us may have preferred. Understatement of the millennium, says Frank. But it is what it is, to use that mantra. And the best we can do is cope, really. Cope and just keep on keeping on, keep getting by. Do what you gotta do. If you thought last time was going to be rough on personal relationships and families who share different views on this issue, it's going to be worse. Oh yeah, I can only imagine. That's got to feel like the wrath of God. That's got to feel like karmic. Like, what did I do? You know, that's got to feel like, man, I clearly messed something up. My karma is off balance. Clearly, I did something in a previous life. Was I Hitler? I shouldn't have said that. I regretted that the instant it came out of my mouth. That's too close to home. Anyway, yeah, not much we can do. I'm probably gonna have an unhealthy amount of escapism in my future. I'm using this as an escape. It'll keep me sane. I'm gonna try to stay safe. And if you really stretch what I'm doing to its breaking point, you could say that I'm doing a service for people, and thereby am being decent to folk. I hope. But it's like, yeah, it's. I mean, it's out of my hands. It's out of our hands individually. Collectively, it is not out of our hands, and we should remember this. Best we can do is keep participating on the local level and hope that the Constitution doesn't get changed to have lifetime appointments to president again. Or something. I don't know. Oh yeah, now I've let the cat out of the bag. It's pretty obvious if you are around in current era and you know what's being discussed and you know when this aired. If you didn't, then now the cat's out of the bag. I've been cagey because I'm sure there's some portion of my audience that is delighted at what's happened. And good for them, I guess. I'm glad they got something. The rest of us, maybe not so much. Anyway, so yeah, next week will probably just be the new book, whichever it is, by Chris Batchelder. I'll type out the names so people can make a decision. To anybody tuning in, admittedly, most people are going to be tuning in super late, so this is super duper short notice. This is over the course of the next 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 6 days. No. 4 days. 5 days. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I know how to count. Definitely. My head's in a bad spot. My sinuses just plugged up out of nowhere like 30 minutes ago, and I was like, and it changes the way my brain thinks. Don't ask why that is, because I don't know. Maybe if somebody knows, that'd be great. Let me type out the names. So the names of the books in question are both by Chris Batchelder, and they are Bear the Shark and quote U.S. exclamation point unquote. So if people have a decision or a vote on that, feel free to throw it at me, bearing in mind it'll still be up to my discretion. But I'll probably go with the will of the people. If multiple people say they want one over the other, y'alls can look those up and see which one of those sounds more appealing. Try to avoid spoilers, I guess. Anyway, that's about it. Oh, cool. My stream just broke. Oh, it's back. That was weird. I really need to remember to record these on the go, even though it's larger. I've been forgetting for the last year, and it means I need to scramble. Anyway, I will see you all later. Thanks again to everyone who tuned in. If you didn't tune in live and you're listening to this after the fact, for some reason listening to all the way into the post reading blather, I don't know why. To be real with you, I don't know why you would do that to yourself. But if you did, then I do these live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, my schedule permitting, starting at 12 noon U.S. East Coast time. So whatever that winds up being, be it EST or EDT, depending on the time of the year. Who knows? Maybe we'll get some good out of everything yet. Where we'll finally get rid of daylight savings. Stupid bloody relic that it is. One way or the other. It's just like. I don't know. This year I've been hit by the seasonal affective disorder pretty hard. More than I remember. Like in the evenings, I feel more hard hit. I think I say that every year. But definitely this year, it's been like, ugh, why is it dark at 4? I don't want that. Because then I want to go to sleep. And I'm like, no, you still have things you need to do, bro. I don't actually call myself bro. Do I? I might. I don't pay attention to myself when I blather at myself. When I talk in my head, I'm not really listening. That's not something you need to tell people. Whatever. Too late now. Cat's out of the bag. Ooh, he talks to himself. At least I don't see a user interface in my head every time I'm interacting with the world. Apparently that's a thing. People see like health and stat. It's weird. It's like a video game interface. I forget the name of that condition. It's not a condition, but a lot of people have it, where they visualize, a heads-up display, if you will. And I'm like, wow, nope. I never have, actually. I can if I think about it, but good. Oh no, so that means it's earlier and earlier. Yes, the dogs demand food at dusk. Oh man, someone could write a pretty good novel by that name. Oh, what was that? There was this book I read, and it was a purchase I had made a couple years ago. It was new at the time, and I got it along with a couple other books, and it wound up being. It wasn't the most disappointing thing I'd read, but I was like, oh, I was sold a bill of goods, and this did not really. It wasn't as bad as the other book that I had gotten at that session, which was Free Chocolate by author whose name is best not remembered, in my opinion, because that felt like a genuine waste of time. This wasn't as bad. It wasn't Pack of Dogs. It was like a something of dogs, and it's like a science fiction book about people on a frontier, on the colonial frontier, on a different planet, and some weirdness that they encounter. Um, and the cover very notably had uh, totally not Ellen Ripley in the power loader, and I was like, oh, cool. And it did not feature as much as I would have liked. But the book was actually pretty good. Like the story was decent. Like I liked the vibe. The vibe was sound. Ah, yes. 4 a.m. food time. What are you doing? Prod, prod, prod. Good times. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. Everyone have a good one. See you all next time.